Hello, good night. Welcome everybody. First of all, I would like to thank Audem for this opportunity to share my work with all of you. My research deals with three important areas: law, literature, and feminism, and explores the work of Mary Wollstonecraft from this point of view. I will now share my presentation with all of you. As the title reads, this is about feminist literary jurisprudence and focusing on Wollstonecraft's struggle for women's legal rights. Law and literature are among the most powerful discourses in the construction of social reality, thus having great influence on how the power is distributed in our society. The discipline of feminist literary jurisprudence, or to use the British locution, reading for the law, can be broadly defined as the literary criticism of law as a patriarchal institution, and covers the entire corpus of feminist literary writings about law. Its objective is political, as it seeks to accomplish legal reforms in order to achieve gender's legal equality through any possible literary genre, namely fiction, poetry, theatre, autobiographies, short stories, etc. In the present case, we are to explore the intersections of literature and feminism within the field of family law, which rules the socio-economic relations of the family during and after marriage. In patriarchal societies, the law becomes an essential instrument to reinforce women's submission to men in very important issues like divorce, child custody and alimony, private property, etc. Up to the late 20th century, the empire of law imposed across the Western world what was legally known as coverture. In the case of Britain, English common law established this legal fiction. A married woman had no legal identity whatsoever, as her individual status was covered by that of her husband. After marriage, no woman had any right to dispose of property or make a will without the consent of her husband, and the children were part of the husband's belongings. We will see how coverture and this institution of marriage applies in Maria, because her life is destroyed by it and is strongly denounced in the novel. Which is my thesis? Well, much as literary and law scholars have devoted many efforts to exploring Victorian fiction in the field of feminist literary jurisprudence, Mary Wollstonecraft's work has been largely overlooked by these scholars. This presentation seeks to demonstrate that her vindications of the right of woman and Maria of the wrongs of woman are not only pioneering works in the field of modern feminism, but also that they are perfect examples of the literary and political objective of the discipline, namely promoting legal reforms that could eventually lead to gender equality. In this paper, first I will explain the origin of the discipline, how it began, and the initial focus on Victorian times. Then I will argue why Wollstonecraft works have been neglected in this legal area, which to me is still inexplicable. Finally, I will read Maria from the lens of FLJ. The combined study of law and literature began in the US law schools in the late 1970s to explore how legal issues can be interwoven with storytelling, or how literature can intervene in the law-making process. The Victorian novel and previous Victorian autobiography accounts gave rise to the discipline, mainly for two reasons. The sociopolitical context surrounding family laws, as Victorian times witnessed an unprecedented fight for women's legal rights. It was carried out through political activism, exemplified by Caroline Norton's and Barbara Lay's pioneering feminist legal pamphlets that played a fundamental role in legislative changes. And also because of the dominance of the Victorian novel in the canon and the attraction of the law for Victorian novelists and readers alike. The legal culture can be perceived in many Victorian novels such as Eliot's and Charles Dickens, who use legal themes to drive their plots. So why is Mary Wollstonecraft neglected by these scholars? Well, unfortunately, Wollstonecraft is barely known out of the academic world. She is rather known as the mother of, in this case, the mother of Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. But in studying her reception, I look at two timelines. The first one, the 18th century society, just immediately after the French Revolution. Well, she had a very, very negative reception in England. She might have been too advanced for her time. But after her death, her widower Godwin disclosed in her memoirs many events that were scandalous at the time. Her premarital relations with Imlay, her suicidal attempts, her illegitimate daughter, Fanny Imlay, who committed suicide, Mary Shelley elopement with Percy, etc. As a result, English society blamed her feminist principles and dismissed her works. Today, although only academically, she is recognized as one of the founders of modern feminism. Yet, her work is dismissed by some feminist scholars like Burgess or Williams, basically because she failed to address women's liberation from the domestic sphere by claiming that women's education was only needed to raise their offspring. The scholars say that she held an essentialist view of females with excessive sentimentalism. While it's true that her work drew on both the rationalist and the essentialist currents, she challenged some of the essentialist female image and added to them a structural and political dimension that distinguishes her thought from anything that came before. Her Vindications of the Rights of Woman is a political and philosophical treatise that represents the first statement about men and women's equality. It introduced the idea of social constructions when saying that men shape women's image as they wish to have them submitting, looking at the female paradigm created through writers like Rousseau in his book Emile. She also argues that the wrongs of women are attributable to education and domestic seclusion, challenging the educational system for women, which should be available equally to both boys and girls. She believes that the institution of marriage reduced women to a state of degradation, as women become mere slaves of men. Well, Maria or the Wrongs of Woman. This is a novel, a Jacobin novel or novel of ideas. It includes many radical thoughts to make them available to a wider readership. This novel was unfinished because Maria died while writing it, but was edited and published posthumously by Godwin, her husband. Regarding the title, we can see an ambiguous, asymmetrical notion: wrongs of woman, rights of woman. I think she refers to wrongs not only done to women by the patriarchal society and the institution of marriage, but also wrongs done by women due to domestic confinement and narrow-minded education, and especially these romantic illusions and this excess of sentimentalism. The story starts with the heroine locked up in an asylum, supposedly mad because she wants divorce from her legal and lawful husband, Mr. Venables. It unfolds as an epistolary narrative. Due to the marriage institution of coverture, Maria's lost her daughter's custody and has been separated from her. She's also lost all her fortune, inherited from an uncle because her husband squandered it with prostitutes and alcohol. In the letters, she explains her struggle to get rid of the marriage unsuccessfully. During the imprisonment, she has a romantic and sexual affair with Mr. Danforth. Now, at the ending of the novel, she faces a trial judged by patriarchal laws. In the trial, Maria is charged with adultery and Danforth with seduction. For it's important to this paper, I'm going to read some passages of the trial. Maria has written a paper and insists on reading it up before the court. She says, "My defense is against the laws of woman, dependent on the caprice of the tyrant. Various are the cases in which a woman ought to separate herself from her husband. I can prove repeated infidelities which I overlooked or pardoned. Witnesses are not wanting to establish these facts. At present, I maintain the child of a maidservant born after our marriage and daughter to my husband. I was determined to leave him, and in the most decided manner, forever. After the birth of my daughter and the death of my uncle, who left a very considerable property to myself and child, I was exposed to new persecution, and I was treated by the world as bound forever to a man whose vices were notorious. I lament the loss of my child, torn from me in the most violent manner. To force me to give my fortune, I was imprisoned, yes, in a private madhouse. The death of my babe dissolved the only tie between me and my lawful husband. I claim then a divorce and the liberty of enjoying free from molestation the fortune left to me by a relation. I appeal to the justice and humanity of the jury, a body of men whose private judgment must be allowed to modify laws that are unjust. Finally, the judge sentences in favor of the husband. In summing up the evidence, he alluded to the fallacy of letting women plead their feelings as an excuse for the violation of the marriage vow. It was her duty to love and obey the man chosen by her parents and relations who were qualified by their experience to judge better for her than she could for herself. To maintain the sanctity of marriage is evidently for the good of the whole. The end. The novel finishes like that, but of course it was unfinished because Maria died. Godwin, when he edited the novel, gathered all her notes for possible endings, in one of which, under the belief that her daughter was dead, she attempts suicide. In the verge of Maria's death, her daughter reappears and saves her life. After the reading of these passages, I think that has been amply proved that Maria not only deserves to be read from FLJ lens, but more importantly, it becomes clear that she pioneered this type of writing, replicated thereafter by many women's writings who suffered the same legal mistreatment. The novel raises all the issues included in FLJ discipline. First, It seeks legal and political reform of the family laws by exposing a most unfair situation of a woman who was compelled to marry a tyrant, a rake, who, taking advantage of her, squandered her fortune and abused her in all possible forms. Second, this story shows how patriarchal laws do not protect women enough and can ruin their lives. Okay, so having finished, I thank you for your attention, and I hope to meet you all in the near future. And let's not forget to foster sorority. We really must help each other. Goodbye.